Hey team, so in this video I'm going to show you guys how to do multiple increases and multiple decreases. You've already learned how to increase by one stitch and decrease by one stitch, but what if you want more? Now that you know casting on and binding off, this is actually going to be fairly straightforward. So I have knit a whole bunch of rows here, and I decided, you know what, I want to add 5 stitches to this side of my knitting. Now obviously I cannot just move, if I try to move these 5 stitches all the way over, I'm not going to have enough turtlenecks to fill up the other needles, and it's going to stretch this and leave a giant hole, and it just makes zero sense. So what I'm actually going to do is something you already know how to do. So basically I want to put 5 new stitches on these needles. And in order to do that, I'm casting onto them. So I'm going to take these 5 needles, I'm going to put them all the way out to D position, like I would if I was doing a regular cast on. And I'm working on the side that my yarn is attached to. If I try to work over here, you can see I'm going to be stretching my yarn across my cloth. So maybe one day you'll have a reason to do that, in which case cool, but generally speaking, you work from the side the yarn is attached to. And this is where it's important to learn how to cast on and bind off left to right and right to left, because I'm going right to left in this case. And on that side I'll have to go left to right. So I start on this needle. Again, I don't want to start over here because then I'm pulling my yarn over and I'm going to wind up with this giant float underneath. So I move to the needle that's right next to one that already has a stitch, and I go underneath it, up in between it and its neighbor, and then underneath the second one, up in between. So I'm doing exactly what I would do if I were E-wrapping to cast on. The only difference is that this yarn is already attached over here. So now I take my yarn, I re-thread my machine. I don't have a tail that I need to worry about, like attaching a clothespin to or a weight to. I double check to make sure nothing is caught behind my gate pegs, it's clear and free. I check my grasshoppers, make sure they have a nice tension. And as always, I'm not yanking these really tight, just like a nice even Goldilocks cast on. So now all I have to do is I bring my carriage, checking my tension as I go, from one side to the next. Now, just like a regular cast on, I don't have enough cloth here to put my weights on, so for the next 3 or 4 rows, I'm going to hold my stitches down with my finger, push the needles all the way out into working position. If I get a little excited and go too far, doesn't matter, just leave them all the way out. And I'm going to knit across. So that's 1. I do the same thing. 2. 3. Check my edge stitches, make sure everything's nice and even. Check to see if I have enough cloth now for my weights, and if I do, I can take this guy and I can put him on over there. Same thing if I want to add stitches on this side, I would just knit in that direction so that my carriage and my yarn are over here. I would push these needles all the way out to D position, do my E-wrap cast on for them, and then do those first 3 rows where I'm pushing the needles out every time, holding my stitches down. You may ask, but what if you want to add stitches to both sides at the same time? That usually doesn't come up as an issue with knitting because knit cloth is a lot more flexible than woven cloth. If I really wanted, let's say I wanted to build a T kind of a shape. So I want extra stitches on one side and extra stitches on the other side. What I can do is, when my carriage is on this hand side, then I increase that hand side, I bring my carriage across, and then I would increase on the other side. Even though there's one row in between them, it generally doesn't make too much of a difference in knitting. If, however, for some reason it is crucial that they absolutely have to be on the same side, all that I would do is if I had a second ball of yarn or from the other end of my yarn, I would pull out a long piece that's at least 3 times the width of how much I want to cast on, plus some extra, be a little generous here. And on one side, I would use the yarn that's attached to the ball to cast on, and then on the other side, I would just use this yarn tail, this yarn scrap. I would cast on with it, and then I would put a clothespin on the 2 little tails that'll be hanging down, just to hold it. And then I treat it just like the other side, pushing the needles out for the first 3 rows, and then hanging the weights. Yeah, so that's it. It's really just casting on. Now the opposite is if I want to decrease more than 1 stitch. What do you think happens? I have to bind off. So I'm going to try this on the side I don't usually work on and see how it goes. I'm going to take my outside needle. Again, I'm working on the side where my yarn is attached. I take the outside needle, pull it all the way out towards me, transfer it onto this tool, go behind the gate peg, transfer it onto that needle, pull it out. I'm going to unthread my carriage, which I should have done to start. And then I'm going to pop that yarn in that hook. So, and then I really want to make sure that this needle, I get it all the way back into A position, because if it's forward at all, when I bring the carriage back across, the carriage is going to think I want to use it, and it's going to throw it into a knitting position. So I'm going to decrease a 1, 2, and do 3, 4. Now, even though I've worked with 5 needles, if this makes sense to you, I've only actually gotten rid of the stitches on 4 needles. So sometimes the keeping track of what you've actually decreased can be a little bit trickier with decreasing than increasing. So, feel free to just count the needles you have stopped using to make sure you've done the right amount of decreases. So there we go. Now I'm going to thread my carriage back again. Now the one trick with this is you can see this knitting is on the gate pegs, right? So that I would have a nice even bind off. So I want my claw weight. Actually, I'm going to take my claw weight off for 1 second. I want to get these guys off the gate pegs. Now if I just try and pull them up, there's a good chance I can pull the knitting right off of these needles. So something you can do, especially when we're doing fairly plain knitting, so the difference between D, B, and C position for the machine doesn't really care right now. The needles that are close by this situation right here, I'm going to pull them all the way into D position, so the stitches are quite a long ways away from the end, harder for them to hop. And now I'm going to just peel this up off of all the gate pegs, double check to make sure none of it's stuck on there, double check to make sure my yarn is not caught behind any of them, and then put my weight on and make sure that my weight is now underneath the needles that are being used. Remember, don't push these needles back into B or C position, because that will close their latches, put the stitch on the wrong side of the latch, and then when I bring the carriage over, I'll drop those stitches. So just leave them as they are, the carriage will correct it. Now I'm going to go across, and I'm done. I don't have to do anything for the next 3 rows the way that I do with increasing. I'm just done. So you can see, I started here, I increased over here, and then I decreased over here. And that's it. that's how you do it. And of course, if you have other ways that you like to cast on or bind off, you can use those ways to do this, if that makes sense. Great, thanks.